Hi everyone, my name's Dave. Thanks for joining me on the channel, and today we're going to talk about the difference between PWM and MPPT solar regulators. If you use a 200 watt solar blanket, we'll usually input around 18 to 20 volts into your battery. If you charge the battery without a solar controller, it will work initially, but eventually it will cook your battery. So you need a solar controller. PWM controllers, I don't know if you've heard of those, but they're the most basic controller. PWM or pulse width modulation controllers are doing exactly that, pulsing power into the battery. The controller is able to change the time, the length or width of the charge. This is modulating the length of the pulse. Using the chart I shall show on the screen in a second, we have the voltage to the left scale, the time along the bottom, so as the charge comes in, the PWM controller turns the input on and off. When the pulse is in the off position, it measures the voltage of the battery and sets itself for the next pulse. You may have noticed on the left hand side the voltage on the chart is around 13 volts. And this is because PWM controllers pull down the voltage to slightly higher than the battery voltage. The regulator is not able to change the voltage, so as the battery charges, the regulator will increase the time off and shorten the length of each charge pulse. For example, let's assume that a 200 watt blanket is putting out 20 volts and 10 amps. And if we use the formula, 20 volts times 10 amps gives us equals 200 watts. However, as soon as we connect the PWM controller, it drops the voltage to around 13 volts. And using the same formula, 13 volts times 10 amps gives you 130 watts. So your 200 watt solar blanket is now running at 130 watts because of the PWM controller. So why use a PWM regulator in the first place? Well, cost is a big factor. They are cheaper and more reliable than other controllers. So reliability is another factor. So let's talk about MPPT controllers. MPPT or maximum power tracking controllers have two separate circuits, whereas a PWM drags the power down to the battery voltage. The MPPT brings in the charge and outputs it to a different level. Using the same setup as before, we get the full 200 watts input going into the controller. At 13 volts, it will put in around 15 amps, equal to 195 watts. Using two identical batteries and two identical solar blankets, both laid on the ground, we set up a PWM MPPT system, and after 30 minutes, the PWM was inputting around 2.79 amps, or 27 watts. Whereas the MPPT was in the same light conditions and everything was inputting around 7.33 amps or 101 watts. So the conclusion to this is if you want reliable input but are not too concerned about power input, then use a PWM controller. However, if you want to maximize the power of the sun and input the best possible power, use an MPPT controller instead. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.